My name is Mark. I'm 35. From the outside, it might look like I'm living a flawless life. My own business, a steady income, a circle of influential connections, a beautiful house outside the city, and a wife 10 years younger than me. But there are things that don't show up in social media photos, especially the shadow that has fallen over my heart in the last few months. At first, I tried to convince myself it was all paranoia. Success often makes you suspicious, I know that. But something in Alina's behavior had changed. Too many messages she tried to hide. Too many sudden delays somewhere. I caught her glances that seemed to slide past me, and I felt a coldness I couldn't explain. I remember the evening when everything shifted. She was sitting at the table, smiling at her phone, leaning over it as if protecting the screen from prying eyes. When I walked into the room, she flinched. I asked who it was. She answered too quickly, too easily. From that day on, I started noticing everything, and as the silence inside me grew heavier, pressing against my chest, I understood. Either I find out the truth, or I lose my mind. I hired a private investigator. It wasn't an easy decision. I felt like a traitor in my own home, but the doubts were eating me alive, like rust. The detective worked quietly, coldly, professionally. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, and I was grateful for that. When he called a week later, his voice was short and dry. "We need to meet." We sat in my office, the place where I usually close big deals and discuss investments, and for the first time, I felt small. He placed an envelope on the table, the one I had feared and at the same time craved all these days. Inside were photos, dates, times, her, and a man I didn't even know. In that moment, something in me snapped. Not loudly, just broke inside, like a thin thread that had been holding on by a miracle. I sat there for a long time, staring at those pictures. Not anger, not rage. The worst feeling was emptiness. The sense of being robbed. Not of money, not of property, but of something you cannot buy: trust. I always thought betrayal was about physical closeness. Now I understood. True betrayal begins earlier, with glances that aren't meant for you, with smiles she hides, with secrets that have no place in a marriage. Now have a choice: to leave, or to look her in the eyes and ask everything and see if there's anything left for me there at all. And for the first time in a long while, I don't know what I'm going to choose. I drove home more slowly than usual. The engine ran quietly, but my thoughts didn't. They crashed against my skull like waves against rocks. And each of them had the same face: hers. When I turned onto our street, my hands on the steering wheel trembled slightly. I wasn't afraid of seeing her, I was afraid of seeing the truth that could no longer hide anywhere. Alina stayed silent for a long time. The silence stretched, tightened around my throat, slapped me harder than any confession. I stood in front of her and felt something heavy and sharp contracting inside me, as if a knife were slowly being twisted in my chest. She opened her eyes. They were wet, but not with tears, with fear. She knew there was no place left to hide. "Mark, she began, but her voice broke. She licked her lips, gathered herself as if preparing to jump into cold water. "It's not what you think." It was the worst thing she could have said. "Not what I think," I repeated, without raising my voice. I didn't have the strength to shout. "Then explain it. Explain what's in these photos." I gently pushed the envelope toward her. She looked away, as if even the sight of the paper burned her eyes. "He was just a friend," she whispered. I laughed. A hollow, joyless, angerless laugh, the kind that escapes when you're so broken you don't know how else to react. "A friend?" "Yes," she nodded, but too quickly, too chaotically. I was just confused. "Nothing happened. Nothing serious. Nothing serious," I repeated, looking straight into her eyes. "Alina, you smile at him in ways you haven't smiled at me in years. You spend time with him while I work to build our future. You hide your phone. You disappear in the evenings. And you're telling me it's nothing serious?" She closed her eyes, and the first tear, heavy, slow, rolled down her cheek. "I didn't want this. I didn't plan." Her voice cracked on every word. "You were busy. Always." I felt lonely, invisible, and he just listened to me. That hit harder than any confession about physical betrayal. I exhaled slowly, deeply, not because I wanted to calm down, but because, For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "So you were looking for attention?" I asked quietly. "And you found someone." She finally took the envelope. Her hands trembled so badly it almost slipped from her fingers. She hadn't even opened it yet, and she already knew what was inside. She collapsed onto a chair, as if her legs had given out. I know how it looks," she whispered, "and I know it's my fault. But I didn't want to lose you." I looked at her for a long time, silently, and in that moment, I understood. She had already lost me. Not now long ago. The moment she first wrote to him, "How are you?" The moment she first hid a message. The moment she decided that another man's ears hurt her better than her husband's. I sat across from her, placed my hands on my knees, and said quietly, "Tell me the truth. All of it. Were you with him?" She lifted her gaze to me, and I saw the last defense inside her finally break. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but those seconds stretched into eternity. Finally, she exhaled and whispered, "Yes." One word, just one, and with it, something inside me fell apart completely, shattered into pieces. I closed my eyes, so I wouldn't break in front of her. She was sitting in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea in her hands. The TV glowed in the background, and she flipped through channels mechanically, not even looking at them. She looked exhausted, not the kind of exhaustion that comes after a long day of work, a different kind. Emotionally drained, with a shadow of guilt I hadn't noticed before, or hadn't wanted to notice. "You're home early," she said, lifting her gaze slightly. "Finished work faster," I replied, standing in the middle of the room as if I had no idea what to do with my hands. She nodded and turned back to the screen. I saw her shoulders tense, a tiny movement, almost invisible, but to me, it was louder than any words. I placed my keys on the table. The sound echoed in the silence like a gunshot. "Alina," began, and she finally turned fully toward me. "We need to talk." Her fingers clutched the blanket, just barely, but I saw it. "About what exactly?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying a note I hadn't heard in a long time. Fear, anticipation, or the readiness to face what was inevitable. I didn't answer immediately. I simply handed her the envelope. She looked at it as if it were something she had already seen in her nightmares. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, but she didn't touch it. "What is this?" she whispered. "What you didn't tell me," I answered, and my own voice sounded like it came from someone else, hollow, drained. The silence between us became almost physical. The air felt like a storm that had finally reached us. Alina pressed her lips together as if trying to hold something inside. Words, truth, tears. I saw her fighting with herself, looking around the room for a way out that didn't exist. "Mark," she said my name so softly, so vulnerably, that a part of me, the part that remembered who she was at the start of our story, almost flinched. "Just tell me," I interrupted quietly but firmly. "Tell me which part of this is true." She didn't take the envelope. She simply closed her eyes. And in that moment, I already knew everything even before she opened her mouth. What hurt wasn't the lie itself. What hurt was that lying had become easier for her than talking to me. I sat with my eyes closed, trying to pull myself together. It felt as if someone were holding my heart in cold water. Alina sniffled quietly across from me, but this time, her tears didn't touch me. There was a wall between us, not made of stone, but of facts that could no longer be erased. I opened my eyes and looked at her. For a long time, a very long time. For several weeks, I lived in a rented loft in the city center. Cold light, bare walls, empty space. But it felt easier that way. The emptiness around me reflected the emptiness inside. And maybe I needed that to finally figure myself out. Alina texted. Not every day at first. She respected my request for space. Then longer messages began to arrive. Apologies, memories, promises. I read all of them. I replied to almost none. I walked a lot through the evening city, sat in cafes, listened to fragments of other people's conversations. I watched couples, some holding hands, some arguing, some silent. But in that silence, there was something real. And one evening, I understood something. I didn't feel anger toward her. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to humiliate or punish her. But I couldn't return to what we had either, because both of us had stopped protecting what we once had. She by betraying I earlier, by being busy with everything except her. At that moment, I realized the thing I feared most. We didn't need to save the old relationship, we needed to honestly admit that it was over. The next morning, drove back to our house. She opened the door herself, as if she'd been waiting for me. "Shall we talk?" I asked. She nodded. Her eyes were sad but calm, like someone ready to hear any verdict. We sat at the same table where everything had recently fallen apart. Now the opposite. I spoke first. "I've thought a lot, and I don't want to live holding onto something that no longer works. But I don't have hatred in me either. I want to let go honestly. No shouting, no war, just humanly." She drew a breath, as if it had suddenly become harder to breathe, but she didn't cry. "If that's your choice," she said quietly, "I'll accept it. And thank you for saying it like this. Not any other way." We sat in silence for a long time. Two people who once loved each other, now simply acknowledging reality. I noticed that I wasn't hurting anymore. There was sadness, a tender mourning for the past, but no poison. We signed the papers 2 weeks later. No scandals, no dirt, no accusations. On the day I came to collect the last of my things, Elena said a sentence I will remember for a long time. "I love you differently now. Not as a husband, as a person I lost because of my own stupidity." "I hope you meet someone who won't forget who she is beside her," replied. "And I hope you meet someone you can tell everything to on time." We hug. For the first time in many months. And the last time. When I walked out the door, I didn't feel defeat, I felt relief. As if I had taken off a weight I'd carried for far too long. I don't know what will come next. Maybe a new chapter, a new love, a new life. But now I know that sometimes the most important decision isn't to save what is falling apart, but to have the courage to let it go. And I let go, as if I were trying to find in her the woman we started this story with. But I couldn't see her anymore. "Mark, please say something," she whispered, clutching the blanket with both hands. I ran a hand over my face, feeling a wave of exhaustion hit me in a single moment, as if over a whole year. "You want to know what I think?" I asked in an even voice. She nodded, swallowing her tears. "I think we lost us long before I ever saw those photos." She covered her face with her hands, but I continued. "I always tried to control everything. Business, finances, our life. But control isn't closeness. And I guess I overlooked that. And you simply allowed someone else to take my place." "No." She lifted her head sharply. "No one took your place. It was a mistake, a weakness. I didn't want it." "I know," I said quietly. "But you did it." She fell silent. The words hung in the air like shards of ice. I stood up. My movements were slow and deliberate, but inside everything was beating, screaming, breaking. I walked to the window. Outside was a black night sky without a single star, a perfect reflection of how I felt. I stood there for a long time, a few minutes or maybe an eternity. Then I said, "I don't want to make decisions while I'm in pain. But I know one thing, things will never be the same." Elena stood up and took a step toward me. "Mark, I'll do anything to rebuild your trust. Please, don't leave now. Don't end this like this." Her voice trembled. She reached out her hand, but didn't touch me. She was afraid. And she was right. I turned to her, for the first time that evening fully. "I'm not leaving forever," I said. "But I need space, time, and honesty. And I need to understand whether I'm capable of forgiving, and whether it even makes sense to try." Her shoulders sagged. She didn't cry anymore, she just looked at me as if she finally realized she had lost control over what mattered to her. I went to the bedroom and began packing a travel bag. Slowly, as if every item weighed down my decision. Elena stood in the doorway in silence. She didn't know what to say, and no words could change what was happening. When I walked out of the house, the air outside felt colder than usual. I put the bag in the trunk, sat in the car, and started the engine. Before driving away, I took a breath and told myself, "I'll come back." But not the same. Never the same again. And I pressed the gas. It was my decision. The first step into the unknown, but the only right one.